Hello, and welcome to the Avenues of Awakening podcast. My name is Thomas Whitmire, and I'll be your host. I conceived of this podcast back in about 2015, after a period of time in which I'd gone through a number of spiritual groups and a lifetime of inquiry with curiosity and exploration. So this show is really intended to be an exploration of what do we mean by spirituality, with the desire to put it in more everyday language, the desire to normalize some of these topics, and a desire to explore and to learn along the way with you, my audience, and some other guests we'll be having. My intended topics are really span the gamut, because across 20 years of spiritual inquiry, I've really come across a whole lot of different realms, you might say. So much like there's many kinds of sports, and they're all called sports, but in spirituality, we could have many kinds of spirituality, really. But at its core, to me, spirituality means the attempt to answer the question, who am I? As well as who was I before I was born? Where am I going when I die? And this, for me, originally stemmed not as a conscious question, but as a feeling. Just like I felt weird being here, weird being in a form, weird being in this dimension, and just didn't quite feel home. You know, what am I doing here? What is this realm, you know? And so from that little seed, and having conversations with friends along the way, it just gradually opened up and became more and more conscious as a spiritual question. So to me, it is the attempt to answer and eventual answering of that question that is the core tenet of what I would call spirituality. So what happened was that I grew up on a Christmas tree farm in upstate South Carolina, which gave me a lot of time to myself, to walk around, to contemplate, to look at the stars, and to wonder what was my place in the universe in this thing called life. Going to college, I first thought I wanted to major in astrophysics because it seemed like the answers to everything were going to be found in the heavens, and that was the deepest source of knowledge. Things like black holes and wormholes, and things like what is light. And then later I switched, after taking a calculus class and a physics class, I realized, like, wait a second, this is mostly math. And my interest subsided, but at about the same time I got into psychology, which seemed to have more pertinent answers for the human realm. And in some ways, it seemed like more answers could be found there. And that took me far, but not as far as I'd hoped. Fundamentally, at the time especially, was a science-oriented field. And it just didn't seem to have touched the emotional territory that I was really interested in. So about this time, I fell into a spiritual group and met an excellent group of friends who have walked alongside me for much of this path for the last 20 years or so. This will be my 40th year on this planet coming up. So it seemed like a good time to really get started on this. And as I said, I was conceiving of this show back in about 2015 with the idea of wanting to give a voice to things I hadn't really heard discussed popularly. And also I was not brought up in a religious household, so my intention was to try to bring some of this into more living room style conversations. I'm here in my living room right now. So more a living room style conversation using a language that I thought and believe is more appropriate for a modern Western American audience. You may have heard terms like enlightenment, awakening, like the show Avenues of Awakening, God consciousness, your absolute nature, samadhi, nirvana. And there's not a consistency on definitions, so I'll try to be as precise as I can with my meaning when I use these terms, but at the same time, I'm going to try not to use some of those older terms. So what happened is that from about age 16 through age 24, 25, 26, it was what I lived and breathed. Just nonstop, like a sponge, soaking it up, having conversations. The groups I went to in college seemed like the reason for being in college. There were a series of experiences along the way that indicated something to me that seemed worthy of exploring further. And this culminated in an awakening experience at the age of 22. And the time after that, ironically, I did not have much context for it still. I did not have many teachers who could help me with that situation. And what I've discovered in the whatever 17, 18 years since then is that a lot of people do have experiences, and a lot of people might not have support for them. A lot of people might not have context for them. And that can be very disorienting. And so with the kinds of experiences that can come around, and there's a lot of kinds, really the way I describe it now in retrospect is a lot of your conditioning, a lot of your beliefs, a lot of your expectations about what is the world can kind of get blown out the window, you know? And I think I spent a good 5 years after that really trying to unpack it, trying to understand it, trying to meet people that could relate. And again, this was not exactly conscious. I didn't even really know what had happened to me at the time. So this brings me up to about age 27, at which point things start to switch. What initially was a passionate interest in spirituality started to look somehow avoidant. And I don't think it's just an age thing. I think a lot of people who had been really going into spirituality in the personal enlightenment direction started to feel the same way. Like, is this still the right track? Is this still appropriate? Is there something I'm avoiding? And so ultimately for me, this was about another 10-year period of really deep personal work, trying to learn how to be an adult, trying to learn how to get a lot of other things in my life kind of at least somewhat patched together and working. And for a lot of people, I knew this meant approaching their weaknesses, approaching their shadow areas, approaching the things they were unconscious of, approaching maybe their karma, their family karma, their traumas, and really trying to approach it from a perspective of healing, which takes a lot of work. And in a lot of ways for me, it seemed within that trying to hold on to different states, trying to hold on to realms of consciousness that may be blissful, ultimately started to feel kind of like this creeping sense that there's something I'm not taking care of. Life was moving on. And so I think anyone aging is going to go through a part of that, but then you start to question that as well. Well, what is it I'm avoiding? What is it I haven't been facing? Why is it that I'm having trouble in these parts of my life? What is going on with that? And so a lot of people I know started getting into 5 to 10 years of just pretty ongoing, steady, what I call shadow work. So to me, that's the second component of avenues of awakening. So we got the personal awakening, enlightenment side of things. We have the shadow work, and then this moves us into the third of the three. And, I love working in threes. A lot of people do. Pattern recognition. Spiritual people love connecting patterns and giving them meaning. So we might look at that one of these episodes. So anyway, this brings us to the last few years wherein a lot of people I know since COVID, about 2020, have really, the inertia of their previous life kind of really slowed down. There was a period of just incubation. So a lot of people right now are trying to kind of from that slowdown, trying to regrow some things that are more seemingly in alignment with what they feel purposefully here to do, or to synthesize, or to offer, or to help others, to be of service. So that's one way I could put it. What is purpose? What is your service? What is your offering? What is your work here? What is your passion? What is your calling? And not only identifying that, but practically speaking, how do we actually activate that? How do we actually get it going in a life that still has plenty of practical demands, relationships, jobs, elder care, anything like that, health issues. And so how do you meaningfully get any of that moving? So that is the original concept of Avenues of Awakening. It's those three components. I could term it self-realization, shadow work, and alignment with purpose. Now, of course, there's plenty of other aspects of spirituality, which gets into the more fun and interesting areas. I have friends who are psychics, who can see spirits and help you get in alignment, who can read hearts, help you heal, who can maybe see illnesses in the body. There's other people that are into Ayurvedic nutrition, acupuncture, herbal medicine, Jungian mythology, local mythology, ecological myth, even things like permaculture and community, systems of community, let's say. Intuition. So there's I probably have a list at least 100 long at this point of episode ideas. So the idea right now is I want to explore different avenues of awakening, ranging from all those that I mentioned into, I'm sure, many others that are going to come up. At times, I like to do longer podcast recordings, such as this one, in which I will be going in depth on a topic, or conversely, hopefully about half the time at least, conducting interviews with people who have these special skill sets and knowledge areas. Maybe they can help us with some guided meditation, some ceremonies, some healing tools. So I think there's a wealth of material available, and my goal, we'll see how well I can pull it off, is to bring some of these people to the give them a voice, give them a platform, and try to just basically pass it on, what we've learned and discovered, and what we're still looking at these days. So it's a very interesting time to be alive. This is a big source of conflict I have in doing this show, and especially since 2015, is that it seemed that for the longest time, quote, spirituality was so separate from your day-to-day life, my day-to-day life. It's like you go to these groups once a week, you practice together, you meditate, and you talk about personal enlightenment, right? And like things have shifted so much, and that the emotional fabric and the psychic and social fabric has changed so much, and in a lot of ways gotten more challenging, and is crying for attention these days as well. Like in terms of how isolated people are feeling, in terms of how many like homeless people I'm seeing on the streets in the last couple of years. It's just gone up so much. Property prices, inflation. So it's like, I do not have the answer to the question of how much to approach those matters in a show, because that's veering into the political domain, and I don't want to approach it politically. And yet it feels that something is called for in terms of you want to talk about healing. Well, we talk about personal healing. What about national healing? How do we approach that? You talk about inner peace. Where does that come from? You talk about feeling connection with other people. Where does that come from? And so I guess I've been asking myself the question, like, to what extent is another piece of media for popular consumption contributing to an answer, right? And to me, that's the essential new question with spirituality. So it's like, what is spirituality in, I don't know how you call this era, but let's call it the COVID and post-COVID era. What does spirituality mean in its attempt to heal, in its attempt to awaken, in its attempting to make connections? To me, a lot of spirituality is about connection. You could almost say spirituality equals connection. Be that with your purpose, with your shadow, with God, with your neighbor, with your loved ones. And that's what seems to have suffered so much in the last couple of years. So there's an action component of spirituality, and there's a community component of spirituality, which I think really has to come back. So we'll be looking at that as well. I'm not sure how much yet. So that's a great introduction to Avenues of Awakening. This is probably the 4th or 5th time I've recorded this, each time with a different microphone and camera. But hopefully this is the one that'll go in the bag and get posted. So thank you very much for tuning in. I'm excited to be doing this show. I have a couple great guests coming up in the very near future. They're just waiting on me to contact them to set up an interview. And otherwise, I encourage you to remember your practice. I encourage you to take a few moments of quiet and reconnection. If you are interested in seeing new videos when they come out, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. I'm also going to display the video version of this on my YouTube channel called Avenues of Awakening. And finally, I have a website. Have it up and running, and there's forums online. So if you want to have a kind of a deeper conversation, feel free to go to avenuesofawakening.com. Check out the forums and get to know some other people there. But in the meantime, I'll post this on YouTube and we can have shorter exchanges there. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again. And until then, stay well.